Can you imagine one of Hollywood's most respected, most admired actresses standing in front of a crowd of London's elite and delivering words that would send shockwaves across the globe? Words so sharp, so pointed, that they immediately became the talk of the town, the topic of heated debates online, and a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. Now, imagine those words weren't aimed at a fellow actress or a politician, but at someone already under constant public scrutiny. Someone whose every move, every statement, every smile is dissected by millions. That person is Meghan Markle. And the woman delivering the blow? Cate Blanchett. The actress known for her poise, her elegance, her unshakable presence in Hollywood, suddenly transformed into a force of verbal precision, calling Meghan out in a way that no one saw coming. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all started with the announcement that Meghan Markle would be receiving the Freedom of the City of London honor. If you're not familiar with it, this isn't just any ceremonial title. This is one of the oldest, most prestigious recognitions in the UK. It dates back centuries, awarded to individuals who have made significant contributions to society, who embody civic virtue, and who command respect in their field. Historically, it's an honor that comes with a sense of pride, responsibility, and, yes, a little pomp. People who receive it are celebrated, admired, and thrust into the spotlight, often in the company of royals, dignitaries, and influential figures. For Meghan, this recognition should have been another feather in her already publicized cap. Yet, in a statement that surprised many, she insisted she didn't deserve it. She downplayed the honor. She framed herself as unworthy. She called herself, in essence, not ready for it. And that's when Cate Blanchett entered the picture. Because someone had to respond. And someone did, in a way that would leave the audience stunned. Blanchett didn't just disagree. She didn't simply offer a polite counterpoint. She unleashed words that were sharp, scathing, and dripping with irony. Brainless, she said. Brainless. Can you imagine hearing that at a formal event in London? Can you picture the gasps, the whispers, the cameras flashing, capturing every second of disbelief on the faces of those in attendance? This wasn't a subtle critique. This wasn't a gentle disagreement. This was a public, devastating roast, the kind that people remember for decades, the kind that changes how someone is perceived in an instant. But let's step back for a moment. Why does this matter? Why should you care about one actress calling another brainless at a gala, even if one of them happens to be a former duchess? Because it's about much more than words. It's about public perception, media narratives, and the pressures that come with being in the spotlight. Meghan Markle has lived under a microscope for years. Every outfit, every comment, every interaction has been analyzed, critiqued, and shared across the world in real time. Social media can elevate someone to celebrity status in an instant, but it can also tear them down just as quickly. And when a figure like Cate Blanchett speaks publicly, she carries a weight that few others do. People listen. People pay attention. People form opinions that ripple across the globe. Now, here's the part that makes this story irresistible. On the surface, it's a celebrity roast. But beneath the glitz, the Hollywood polish, and the royal associations, there's a drama that cuts deeper. There's tension between humility and arrogance, between public image and private perception. There's the subtle clash of Hollywood power and royal protocol. And then there's the human element, embarrassment, vulnerability, pride, and the very real emotional stakes for someone like Meghan. She's no stranger to criticism, of course. But public humiliation delivered by one of the most respected actresses in the world? That's a different level entirely. You might be wondering, what exactly did Blanchett say? What made the world stop in its tracks? And why did the media, social platforms, and gossip outlets explode with reaction almost instantly? All of that will unfold in this story. We'll take you inside the gala, behind the cameras, and into the minds of both women as this encounter unfolded. You'll hear about the audience reactions, the whispers in the room, and the subtle cues that told the story no one else could see. But there's more. The story doesn't stop at the event itself. Because in today's world, words spoken in public don't remain in the room. They spread. They ignite debates. They become viral. And in this case, Blanchett's comments sparked an international conversation. Supporters of Meghan came to her defense, arguing that the former Duchess had every right to remain humble. Critics, however, applauded Blanchett, saying she was simply speaking a truth that no one else had dared voice. And in the midst of it all, Meghan had to decide how to respond, not just to Blanchett's words, but to the global scrutiny that followed. Here's the thing, moments like these aren't just about personal conflict. They reveal cultural tensions, they expose social expectations, and they force us to ask difficult questions. How much humility is too much? How much critique is justified? And in a world obsessed with celebrity and royalty, where does accountability begin and end? This isn't just entertainment gossip. This is a reflection of our collective fascination with fame, with power, and with the lines that separate admiration from ridicule. So, as we dive into this story, ask yourself, if you were in Meghan's shoes, how would you react? Would you shrink back into polite silence, maintaining your dignity? Or would you strike back, reclaiming the narrative in your own way? And what about Blanchett? Was she crossing a line, or merely holding up a mirror that Meghan had been avoiding for years? And finally, there's one twist that few have anticipated. Because while everyone is focusing on the words themselves, the real shock, the part that will redefine how this story is remembered, lies not in what was said, but in the layers beneath it, the intentions, the context, and the unforeseen consequences. What Cate Blanchett did that night would ripple far beyond the room. It would spark debates that continue today. And it would challenge Meghan in ways that no royal protocol, no Hollywood press release, and no carefully crafted image could have prepared her for. Could you imagine walking into a room filled with London's elite, the cream of the city's cultural, political, and social circles, all gathered for a ceremony meant to celebrate honor and achievement? The chandeliers gleamed, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. The air was thick with expectation, with polite applause rehearsed before it even began. And there, at the center of it all, stood Meghan Markle, poised, elegant, serene, or at least, that's what the cameras would show. Behind the composed smile, however, nerves were bubbling. She knew every eye in the room was on her. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle shift in attention would be recorded, discussed, dissected. And she had no idea that the moment she stepped onto that stage, her carefully curated public persona would be put to the ultimate test. This wasn't just another public appearance. This was the Freedom of the City of London honor, one of the oldest and most prestigious civic awards in the world. It's an accolade steeped in history, symbolizing not only achievement but also responsibility. Receiving it isn't just a personal victory. It's a public acknowledgement that your life, your work, and your contributions matter to society. Recipients are celebrated, feted, and photographed, and the event itself is covered by the media with reverence, almost ritualistic attention. For Meghan, who had long navigated the complex and often unforgiving landscape of public opinion, this should have been a moment of triumph. Yet it wasn't. From the start, there was tension. Meghan had publicly stated that she didn't deserve the honor. She insisted she wasn't worthy, that others had achieved more, that she should step aside. To the average observer, this might seem like humility. To the seasoned eye, however, it's complicated. Because in a room where expectations are as rigid as the dress codes, claiming unworthiness doesn't always win sympathy. It can be perceived as awkward, self-effacing, even condescending. And in this particular moment, the atmosphere in the hall was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Enter Cate Blanchett. If Meghan's nerves were already frayed, Blanchett's presence was like adding gasoline to the fire. Known for her unflinching honesty, her razor-sharp wit, and her commanding presence, Blanchett doesn't do small talk. She doesn't couch criticism in soft words. She has a history of speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes audiences squirm. And on this night, in a room full of poised smiles and polished etiquette, Blanchett was about to turn the ceremonial event into something entirely different, a spectacle that would reverberate far beyond the walls of the hall. As Meghan approached the podium to accept the honor, Blanchett was already in position, poised, calm, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her lips. Cameras clicked. The audience leaned forward. And then, the words came. Not polite, not diplomatic, brutal, brainless. The word itself hit the room like a lightning bolt. You could feel it in the air. Whispers, Gasps. A momentary pause as the audience processed the unexpected audacity. And then the room erupted, not in applause, but in stunned murmurs, in the kind of tension that makes every person present feel as though they've just witnessed something historic. It wasn't just the word. It was the delivery, the timing, the calmness behind the statement. Blanchett didn't scream. She didn't stammer. She didn't make a joke to soften it. She spoke with the precision of a surgeon, every syllable deliberate, every inflection controlled. It was a verbal strike designed to leave no room for misinterpretation. Brainless. And in that single word, a dozen implications hovered. Critique of judgment, intelligence, and perception, all rolled into one. For Meghan, who had spent years navigating public perception and media scrutiny, it was like stepping into a storm with no umbrella. The audience reaction was immediate. Cameras flashed, capturing frozen expressions of shock. Some guests whispered among themselves, trying to process the audacity of the statement in a formal, almost sacred setting. Others stifled laughter, uncertain whether to appreciate the blunt truth or recoil at its cruelty. And in that moment, Meghan's composure was tested like never before. Would she smile politely and nod, maintaining the grace expected of someone in her position? Would she respond, risking further public attention? Or would she simply retreat into silence, letting the words hang in the air like a dark cloud? But while the room processed the verbal strike, the media was already reacting, live tweeting, filming, posting. Within minutes, journalists and photographers were analyzing every gesture, every facial expression, every nuance. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Cate Blanchett calls Meghan Markle brainless at London ceremony. Royal meets Hollywood honesty, Meghan stunned. Social media users exploded with commentary. Some defended Meghan, insisting the term was harsh, unwarranted, even cruel. Others applauded Blanchett, praising her courage to speak what many were allegedly thinking. Memes were created, hashtags trended, and debates erupted across platforms. Within a matter of hours, the event had transcended its ceremonial purpose, becoming a global talking point. And yet, even with all the media coverage, all the social commentary, the real drama wasn't public yet. Because while the cameras captured the moment, they couldn't fully convey the emotional undercurrent. The tension backstage, the subtle glances, the whispered conversations, the pulse of anxiety in the air. These were the pieces that would later define how the world understood what happened. Blanchett's words were more than a single insult. They were a catalyst, igniting a chain reaction of scrutiny, debate, and reflection that would challenge Meghan in ways she hadn't anticipated. So what made this event different from any other public embarrassment Meghan had faced before? For one, it wasn't manufactured by the media. It wasn't a tabloid invention or a scandal concocted for clicks. It was real. It was direct. It was a confrontation in plain sight, delivered by someone whose voice carries weight in Hollywood and beyond. And unlike the press, Blanchett's words didn't hide behind ambiguity or insinuation. They were clear, concise, and pointed, leaving Meghan no room to deflect or reframe. The challenge now was immediate, personal, and public. But here's the kicker. Meghan's reaction would determine more than just her personal reputation. It would influence public perception, media narratives, and even the broader conversation about celebrity, royalty, and the complex intersections between them. Every choice she made, every nuance in her response, would be magnified, analyzed, and interpreted. And all of it would stem from that single, devastating word, brainless. The stage was set. Cameras were rolling. The audience was on edge. Social media was poised to explode. And Meghan Markle, a woman used to public scrutiny, yet never quite prepared for moments like this, had to navigate a minefield that had been set in motion by one of Hollywood's most fearless truth-tellers. Have you ever wondered what makes someone fearless? Not the kind of fearlessness that gets applauded in movies or awards shows, but the kind that makes the world pause, take notice, and maybe even flinch? Cate Blanchett embodies that type of fearlessness. She doesn't just act. She commands attention, not through spectacle, but through precision, poise, and the kind of honesty that cuts through the noise. And on that night, at the Freedom of the City of London ceremony, that fearlessness would become unforgettable, not on screen, but in real life. Blanchett has long been celebrated as one of the greatest actresses of her generation. Oscars, Golden Globes, BAFTAs, she has them all. But awards don't define her. What makes her remarkable isn't the accolades. It's the way she navigates truth and power. In interviews, she has never shied away from critique, from calling out injustices, or from speaking her mind even when it's uncomfortable. The industry respects her not just for her talent, but for her integrity. When Blanchett speaks, people listen, not because she demands it, but because she has earned the right. Think about it. Hollywood is a world built on image, diplomacy, and careful wording. Every public appearance is strategized. Every comment is weighed, rehearsed, and measured to avoid offense. And yet, Blanchett consistently subverts that expectation. She has a reputation for saying what she believes without cushioning it for public consumption. She doesn't sugarcoat. She doesn't hedge. And while many might mistake that for arrogance, it's actually a combination of confidence, intelligence, and understanding of human psychology. She knows the power of words, and she wields it deliberately. Which brings us back to Meghan Markle. When Blanchett uttered that word, brainless, in front of a room full of London's elite, it was not an accident. It was a calculated moment, designed to pierce through pretense and public persona. To understand the full weight of that moment, you have to understand Cate Blanchett as more than an actress. She is a truth-teller, a woman unafraid of confrontation, and someone who understands the social dynamics of a room better than almost anyone. Let's rewind for a moment and look at her track record. Blanchett has never been afraid to speak truth to power. In 2015, she delivered a speech at a film festival criticizing the lack of diversity in Hollywood, pointing out the systemic sexism and racism that often goes unnoticed. She didn't couch her critique in polite language. She called out the industry directly, naming the problems, highlighting the hypocrisy, and demanding accountability. People applauded her bravery, but some were offended. That's Blanchett. Unflinching, uncompromising, fearless. And it's this very quality that made her words to Meghan so sharp, so cutting, so memorable. But what does it mean to be fearless in a room full of royalty, media, and celebrities? It's more than just speaking. It's understanding timing, tone, and context. It's recognizing that a word, delivered with precision, can alter the perception of an individual instantly. When Blanchett stood there, poised and calm, and delivered her statement about Meghan, she wasn't just throwing an insult. She was making a statement about accountability, humility, and public perception. And the room, whether they realized it or not, understood the gravity of that statement immediately. What makes this moment fascinating, almost cinematic in its drama, is the contrast between the two women. Meghan, the former Duchess, accustomed to navigating royal protocol and media scrutiny with caution and diplomacy, versus Cate, the fearless Hollywood powerhouse who speaks first and lets the consequences follow. It's the classic collision of worlds, royalty versus celebrity, caution versus boldness, diplomacy versus honesty. And the result? A public spectacle that no one could have predicted. Blanchett's fearlessness isn't just a personality trait. It's a skill honed over decades. She understands human psychology and the power of observation. She reads rooms the way actors read scripts, noting reactions, body language, and subtle shifts in energy. On that night, she would have seen Meghan's nerves, her careful posture, her attempt to maintain composure under scrutiny. And she used that knowledge to deliver her words with maximum impact. Every pause, every inflection, every deliberate glance was part of the performance. A performance not on film, but in real life, with consequences that would ripple far beyond the hall. But let's be honest, calling someone brainless in front of an audience isn't just fearlessness, it's audacity. It's risk. There's always a chance that the room could recoil, that the media could twist it, that public opinion could turn. Yet Blanchett took that risk, and it paid off. The word hit like a thunderclap, leaving everyone in stunned silence for a brief moment before reality and shockwaves set in. The power of that word wasn't in cruelty alone. It was in its timing, its delivery, and the undeniable truth it suggested to some observers. Cate Blanchett has always understood one critical principle. The more controlled the delivery, the greater the impact. She doesn't shout to be heard. She doesn't exaggerate to dominate. She uses subtlety, mastery of timing, and a presence so commanding that even silence becomes a tool. And in a room like that, filled with cameras, journalists, and elite spectators, such a skill is magnified exponentially. What might seem like a simple insult to the casual observer is, in fact, a calculated strike in the art of public perception. Consider the broader implications of that moment. In one word, Blanchett managed to expose a tension many had been whispering about for years. Meghan's statements of humility, her insistence that she didn't deserve the freedom of the city honor, had already caused murmurs among royal watchers and media pundits. People questioned whether it was sincere humility, insecurity, or a carefully crafted public image strategy. Blanchett's remark didn't just punctuate the tension, it amplified it. It made private doubts public. It made whispered critiques audible. And it forced the audience, and the world, to confront the contrast between image and perception. And yet, what's truly remarkable is that Blanchett did all this without raising her voice, without theatrics, and without breaking the poised elegance that defines her. There was no shouting, no dramatics, no need for spectacle. Just words, carefully chosen, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who understands the mechanics of power and perception better than almost anyone else in the world. It was an artistry of influence, and the world would soon take notice. But the story doesn't end there. Because while the moment itself was electric, the consequences were even more profound. Social media erupted, journalists dissected every nuance, and debates ignited across continents. Everyone wanted to know. Was Blanchett justified? Was Meghan humiliated? Did this change the public's perception of the former Duchess permanently? And how would Meghan respond to a public roast of this magnitude? A roast delivered not by a tabloid, not by critics, but by one of the most respected actresses alive. The tension was palpable. The stakes were enormous. And for the first time, millions of people began to see Meghan Markle not just as a royal figure, but as someone vulnerable, exposed, and, in many ways, human in a way that no official statement or carefully curated image could portray. But as the audience would soon realize, Cate Blanchett's words were only the opening act. The fallout, the responses, the media frenzy, and the emotional consequences were all yet to unfold. And what came next would shock not just Meghan, but everyone watching. Have you ever noticed how some public figures seem to have a magnet for controversy? How? No matter how carefully they craft their image, no matter how polished their statements, they seem to stumble into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Meghan Markle is one of those figures. And to understand why Cate Blanchett's words cut so sharply, why the room went silent and social media erupted, we have to look back. Not just at that one moment, but at a history of public missteps that set the stage for the perfect storm. From the very beginning, Meghan's life in the public eye has been complicated. Before she even became royalty, she navigated the scrutiny of Hollywood, where every interview, every tweet, every gesture could be dissected and criticized. Meghan was known for her advocacy, her charitable work, and her public statements about gender equality, mental health, and social justice. She spoke boldly, and people admired her for it. But with visibility comes vulnerability. The more you speak, the more you risk misinterpretation, and Meghan quickly learned this the hard way. One early example comes from her acting career. During interviews, she was candid about her experiences in Hollywood, often highlighting sexism, inequality, or the challenges of being a woman in a competitive industry. Admirable, right? Yes, but her candidness sometimes backfired. Sound bites were taken out of context, social media amplified the critique, and critics accused her of being self-righteous or attention-seeking. Every statement, no matter how nuanced, became fodder for debate. She learned, sometimes painfully, that being outspoken carries consequences, and that public perception rarely allows for nuance. Then came the transition to royal life. Suddenly, Meghan's world changed dramatically. She was no longer just an actress. She was a duchess, a member of one of the most scrutinized families in history. And the rules were different. In Hollywood, outspoken advocacy could be admired. In the royal sphere, it could be perceived as stepping out of line. Royals are expected to maintain a balance between influence and restraint, to navigate tradition carefully, to project humility, and to avoid controversy. Meghan struggled with this adjustment. The media, especially the British press, was relentless. Every gesture, every smile, every word was dissected. And for a woman accustomed to being in control of her narrative, this scrutiny was suffocating. Let's look at some specific examples. One of Meghan's earliest missteps as a duchess was her interview comments about balancing royal duties with personal identity. She spoke openly about the challenges, the expectations, and the pressures she faced. Admirable honesty, but the timing and phrasing drew criticism. Some interpreted her words as complaints, others as subtle critiques of the monarchy. Suddenly, her statements that were meant to humanize her instead became a source of public debate. The media headlines ran wild. Duchess struggles with tradition, or Meghan complains about royal life. The nuance was lost. The consequences were real. And from that point on, Meghan's every public appearance carried this weight of interpretation, of prejudgment. Then there were moments of perceived hypocrisy. Meghan often spoke about humility, empathy, and service. Yet at times, she appeared to contradict these principles in the eyes of the public. Photos emerged of lavish events, charitable appearances that coincided with expensive fashion choices, and interactions that some perceived as distant or dismissive. These instances, however small or misinterpreted, created a narrative of contradiction, a woman preaching humility while living a life of privilege. This contradiction may not have been intentional, but perception is everything in the court of public opinion, and it made her vulnerable to criticism. Social media has only amplified these missteps. Every outfit, every gesture, every subtle facial expression is recorded, shared, and analyzed. The Meghan effect, as some commentators call it, refers to how ordinary moments are transformed into viral content, often magnifying minor errors into major controversies. A wink becomes a smirk. A polite nod becomes arrogance. And each misstep builds on the last, creating a public persona that is increasingly difficult to navigate. Meghan's humility statements, her insistence that she didn't deserve the freedom of the city honor, didn't exist in a vacuum. They were interpreted through the lens of her entire public history, a history marked by moments of perceived misjudgment, misstatement, or overreach. But here's the critical point. These public missteps weren't always her fault. Misinterpretation, media framing, and social media amplification played enormous roles. Meghan was navigating a world where millions of people felt entitled to pass judgment on her every move. Context often disappeared, subtlety was ignored, and the smallest nuance became a battleground for public opinion. Yet, despite these challenges, she continued to speak her truth, continue her advocacy, and continue presenting herself authentically. Sometimes clashing with public expectation in the process. And that's exactly why Blanchett's words landed with such force. Because they didn't come from a tabloid, a journalist, or a social media troll. They came from a peer, a fellow woman in the public eye, someone who understood the stakes but was unafraid to speak plainly. Cate's observation wasn't about fashion or privilege or royal protocol. It was about pattern recognition. The repeated public moments that had shaped Meghan's image and her vulnerability. Blanchett saw what the world saw. Someone publicly claiming unworthiness while simultaneously living in a spotlight that magnifies every word, gesture, and nuance. Let's consider the psychology of public missteps. Every person has moments where humility, self-awareness, and public perception collide. For Meghan, these moments were amplified by historical, social, and cultural expectations. She wasn't just judged as a woman or a celebrity. She was judged as a duchess, as a symbol of modern royalty, as someone tasked with bridging tradition and contemporary values. Every mistake, every perceived misstatement, added layers of complexity. And these layers created a vulnerability that Blanchett's words could pierce with laser precision. What makes this particularly dramatic is the contrast between intention and perception. Meghan's claim that she didn't deserve the freedom of the city honor may have been intended as modesty, humility, or even gratitude. But in the public eye, intention doesn't always matter. Perception is reality. And the perception in that moment, amplified by decades of media scrutiny and prior missteps, was that Meghan was underplaying her achievements while simultaneously inviting judgment. Blanchett's words acted as a magnifying glass, exposing the tension between intention and perception in a way that was impossible to ignore. And here's another layer most people overlook: the emotional toll. Living under this kind of scrutiny is exhausting, isolating, and emotionally fraught. Meghan has spoken, in controlled interviews, about the pressure, the anxiety, and the difficulty of balancing personal integrity with public expectation. Every misstep, no matter how small, carries consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes delayed, but always magnified by the world watching. The Freedom of the City ceremony wasn't just another event on her calendar. It was a moment that would trigger a history of judgment, expectation, and scrutiny, and Blanchett's words were the spark that ignited it all. So, when Cate Blanchett delivered that single, devastating word, it wasn't merely a roast. It was a collision of history, psychology, public perception, and celebrity culture. It was the culmination of decades of scrutiny, public missteps, and media magnification. And for Meghan, it represented more than embarrassment. It was a reminder of the relentless gaze that has followed her every step, a reflection of the vulnerability created by years of public misjudgment. Have you ever witnessed a moment so charged, so electric, that it feels like the air itself is holding its breath? That was exactly the atmosphere at the Freedom of the City of London ceremony the night Cate Blanchett delivered her words. And let's be honest, it wasn't just a word. It was a full-blown public roast that stunned everyone in attendance. To truly understand the impact, we have to walk through the moment in meticulous detail, frame by frame, capturing the tension, the subtleties, and the reactions that made it unforgettable. The ceremony itself was a portrait of tradition. The hall gleamed with centuries of history, the chandeliers casting a warm, almost reverential glow. Guests dressed in formal attire, some in evening gowns, some in tuxedos, all carefully observing the etiquette expected in such a prestigious setting. Cameras were strategically positioned to capture every handshake, every bow, every subtle glance. On the surface, it was a controlled, elegant environment, the epitome of decorum and civility. But beneath that polished exterior, the stage was set for drama. Meghan Markle entered the room with her signature poise, her steps measured, her expression calm but alert. She had prepared, rehearsed, and polished her demeanor countless times before. And yet, as she approached the podium to accept the Freedom of the City honor, something shifted in the room. Perhaps it was the presence of Cate Blanchett, poised in the audience with that quiet, unflinching gaze that always seemed to see more than anyone else. Perhaps it was the subtle tension of knowing that every word spoken here would be amplified far beyond the walls of the hall. Whatever it was, the air changed in a way that demanded attention. Blanchett didn't need theatrics. She didn't need a grand entrance. She simply leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Meghan, and waited. The timing was impeccable. Meghan began her speech, carefully measured, modest in tone, expressing gratitude while simultaneously insisting she didn't feel worthy of the honor. The words were well-intentioned, even humble. Yet in that moment, the room, and particularly Blanchett, recognized the contradiction. Here was a woman claiming unworthiness while occupying one of the most scrutinized, most celebrated positions in the world. And then came the word, brainless, short, sharp, devastating in its precision. You could hear it echo, even over polite applause and murmurs. Blanchett's delivery was calm, almost serene, but the effect was electric. The word hung in the air, a sudden jolt to everyone present. Some guests gasped, some froze mid-cheer. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain whether to laugh, react, or simply absorb the shock. Cameras snapped relentlessly, trying to capture every micro-expression on Meghan's face. And Meghan, for the first time that night, had to confront a reality she couldn't control. It's important to pause here and reflect on the psychology of that moment. Why did that single word hit so hard? It wasn't just the insult itself. It was the authority behind it. Cate Blanchett carries weight. When she speaks, people listen. The word brainless, coming from anyone else, might have been dismissed, ignored, or even laughed off. But from Blanchett, it resonated. It carried implication, judgment, and insight, all wrapped in a tone that suggested she wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was merely stating a truth as she saw it. And the audience, sensing the gravity of that assessment, reacted in real time. What made it even more shocking was the subtlety. Blanchett didn't scream. She didn't gesture dramatically. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke, almost conversationally, and let the weight of the word do the work. There's an art to this kind of critique, a mastery of timing, tone, and presence. It's one thing to insult someone. It's another to make a room full of elite spectators collectively absorb the insult in stunned silence. Blanchett had accomplished the latter. The immediate reactions in the room were telling. Some members of the audience smiled awkwardly, unsure whether it was appropriate to acknowledge the jab. Others whispered hurriedly, perhaps debating the audacity of the statement. And Meghan herself, maintaining outward composure, was processing every layer of the attack internally. The cameras couldn't fully capture the internal turmoil, but anyone watching closely could see the brief flicker of hesitation, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes seemed to search for an anchor in the room. Social media erupted almost instantly. Within minutes, reporters and onlookers began live tweeting the moment, sharing videos and snippets. Headlines formed within hours. Cate Blanchett publicly calls Meghan Markle brainless at London ceremony. Duchess stunned by Hollywood icon's words. Royal meets Hollywood fearlessness. The roast you won't forget. Memes were created, commentary was divided, and debates flared across continents. The power of that word, delivered in that setting, extended far beyond the hall itself. But what makes this moment even more fascinating is the layers beneath it. On one level, it was simply a verbal jab. On another, it was a commentary on public perception, humility, and accountability. Cate Blanchett wasn't just insulting Meghan. She was pointing out the tension between image and reality, the challenge of navigating public expectation while maintaining authenticity, and the contradictions that can arise when personal humility is projected onto a global stage. The word brainless became shorthand for a larger discussion. The scrutiny, the expectations, and the challenges of living under constant observation. And here's a detail many overlooked. Blanchett's words weren't premeditated in the way a scripted performance might be. They were responsive, intuitive, and precise. She had observed Meghan's demeanor, her speech, her gestures, and her words, and she had delivered an assessment in real time. That's a skill few possess, the ability to interpret a situation instantly, assess the underlying dynamics, and deliver commentary that is both devastatingly accurate and socially resonant. The aftermath in the room was tense. Meghan continued her speech, carefully navigating her words, but the energy had shifted. The audience's focus had turned from ceremonial celebration to witnessing a subtle confrontation between two powerful women. Journalists noted the change immediately. Social media users dissected every frame, analyzing expressions, body language, and potential implications. What might have been a ceremonial moment became a defining moment. Not just for Meghan, but for public perception of her character, her composure, and her ability to handle criticism. And yet, despite the tension, there was a strange elegance to the scene. Blanchett's words, while sharp, were delivered with sophistication. Meghan's response, measured and composed, demonstrated a resilience that few could ignore. The contrast created a dynamic almost cinematic in its intensity. Raw honesty versus cultivated poise, criticism versus humility, Hollywood boldness versus royal protocol. The room, knowingly or unknowingly, had witnessed a clash that was both personal and symbolic, a moment that would be analyzed for years to come. But the story doesn't end with the delivery of the word itself. The ripple effects were immediate and ongoing. Conversations backstage revealed mixed reactions. Some admired Blanchett's courage, some worried about the diplomatic implications, and others speculated about Meghan's internal response. Social media debates surged, turning the event into a viral phenomenon. Headlines, opinion pieces, and commentary dissected the interaction endlessly. What was once a private moment in a ceremonial hall had become a global conversation about humility, celebrity, and accountability. And yet, as dramatic as the moment was, it was just the beginning. Because what happens after a public roast like this, how Meghan responds, how the media frames it, and how the world interprets it, can change narratives, redefine reputations, and influence public perception for years. And Meghan's next move, as it would soon become clear, would surprise everyone watching. Have you ever experienced a moment where time seems to slow, where the seconds stretch and the weight of what just happened sinks in fully? That's exactly what the immediate fallout of Cate Blanchett's words felt like, not just for Meghan Markle, but for everyone present in that gilded London hall. The word brainless had landed like a bomb, and the consequences were instantaneous, reverberating through the room, through media channels, and through social media networks around the world. Backstage, the energy was electric, tinged with disbelief. Event organizers whispered hurriedly, trying to gauge the impact and manage optics. Staffers moved quickly, shuffling programs and adjusting schedules, but the moment had already slipped beyond their control. In private corners, guests murmured to each other, exchanging glances that conveyed a mix of awe, shock, and fascination. Some marveled at Blanchett's audacity, whispering that she had done what everyone had been thinking but no one had dared to say. Others worried about the ripple effects, both for Meghan's reputation and for the delicate balance of royal and public relations. Meanwhile, Meghan had to navigate the fallout in real time. For a woman accustomed to maintaining composure under public scrutiny, this was a test of a different magnitude. She continued her speech, choosing her words with painstaking care, smiling politely at the audience, nodding in acknowledgement of Blanchett's presence, but internally, the moment weighed heavily. Every micro-expression was magnified by cameras, analyzed by experts, and dissected by the media. One fleeting look of hesitation could become evidence of guilt, insecurity, or embarrassment, and the pressure was relentless. As Meghan moved off the podium, the murmurs began to turn into conversations, then into social media commentary, then into a full-blown media frenzy. Reporters took the stage, capturing reactions from attendees and recording interviews for live broadcasts. Twitter exploded almost immediately, with hashtags trending in minutes. Hashtag Blanchett roast, hashtag Meghan moment, hashtag freedom of the city drama. Users dissected every gesture, every phrase, every glance, turning a ceremonial moment into a viral event within moments. Instagram Reels replayed the exchange over and over, each time emphasizing Blanchett's calm, precise delivery and Meghan's carefully measured response. But what made this moment particularly striking was the speed at which public opinion began to form. On one side were those who admired Blanchett, praising her courage to speak plainly, to articulate what many felt but lacked the audacity to say aloud. Critics applauded her precision, noting that her calm, controlled delivery had amplified the impact of the words far beyond what a shouting match ever could. On the other side were Meghan supporters, who decried the word as unnecessarily harsh, uncalled for, and cruel. They argued that Blanchett had crossed a line, turning an honor into a spectacle, and that the Duchess was unfairly humiliated in front of the world. In the media landscape, the fallout was instantaneous. Opinion pieces, editorials, and news segments flooded outlets within hours. Headlines ranged from the neutral, Cate Blanchett addresses Meghan Markle's modesty at ceremony, to the sensational, Duchess of Sussex publicly humiliated by Hollywood icon. Analysts debated the implications endlessly. Was this a career-defining moment for Blanchett as a fearless truth-teller? Or was it a damaging public moment for Meghan that would forever alter her image? Every perspective fueled further discussion, ensuring that the event would dominate the news cycle for days. Meanwhile, inside the hall, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Guests whispered among themselves, speculating about what would happen next. Some tried to lighten the mood with forced laughter, but the energy had shifted. The ceremonial decorum had been disrupted, replaced with an acute awareness of the social dynamics at play. Those who had come expecting an elegant, scripted event were now witnessing the unpredictable collision of personalities, history, and perception. And in that room, no one could remain neutral. Everyone was processing, reacting, and wondering, what would Meghan do next? But beyond the immediate room, the ripple effects reached Meghan's inner circle. Advisors, friends, and family were already assessing damage control. In situations like this, quick, calculated responses are crucial. Every statement, every public appearance, every interview in the coming days would be scrutinized for clues about her composure, her emotional state, and her strategy for managing the fallout. The stakes were enormous. One misstep in response could magnify the situation exponentially, while a measured, graceful handling could mitigate it, or even turn the narrative in her favor. And yet, the public wasn't waiting. Social media users didn't care about nuance, context, or intent. Within hours, memes and commentary had transformed the moment into a cultural touchstone. Some posts depicted Meghan as frozen, overwhelmed, and unprepared. Others depicted Blanchett as a fearless enforcer of truth, the archetype of brutal honesty that the world rarely sees in public figures. Every angle was analyzed, every detail dissected, every second replayed, and the more the moment circulated, the larger the stakes became. But what makes this fallout particularly fascinating is how it exposed the fragility of public image. Meghan had spent years carefully crafting her persona, balancing humility, advocacy, and celebrity status, only to have a single word unravel the narrative, at least temporarily. The moment highlighted a truth that anyone in the public eye knows all too well. No amount of preparation can fully shield you from perception, from judgment, from the sudden collision of narrative and reality. One word, spoken with precision, can redefine how the world sees you. The emotional stakes were also immense. Meghan's internal experience during this fallout is something the public rarely witnesses, yet it is critical to understanding the moment. Maintaining composure while under such intense scrutiny requires both skill and emotional resilience. Every subtle gesture, every calculated smile, every measured word becomes part of a delicate performance of self-preservation. And yet, in moments like this, internal pressure can feel crushing, even to the most composed public figures. The emotional tension is palpable, and the world, watching through screens and cameras, senses it instinctively. Meanwhile, media outlets scrambled to contextualize the moment. Experts debated whether the roast was fair, whether it revealed truths about Meghan, and whether it reflected broader social dynamics. Television anchors replayed clips, paused on expressions, and analyzed reactions. Podcasts dissected the event for hours, while influencers across platforms offered commentary ranging from sympathy to schadenfreude. Every angle fed into the cycle, ensuring that the fallout wouldn't fade quickly. The moment had achieved viral permanence. And yet, amidst all this chaos, a fascinating pattern emerged. While some criticized Blanchett, many more were impressed by her boldness, her timing, and her precision. In a world where social niceties often prevent honesty, her words were a jolt of raw authenticity, a reminder that truth, even when uncomfortable, has power. It was this duality, public criticism combined with admiration, that magnified the moment, turning it from a single incident into a defining cultural flashpoint. But here's the kicker. The immediate fallout was only the beginning. The public reaction, the media analysis, and the social media frenzy set the stage for what would come next. A series of responses, counter-responses, and unexpected developments that would escalate the drama far beyond what anyone in the room had anticipated. Because in moments like these, the initial impact is just the spark. The fire comes after, fueled by perception, emotion, and relentless attention. When a word lands like a bomb in a room full of people, the immediate reaction is often invisible. The audience freezes, whispers circulate, and cameras capture every micro-expression. But then comes the moment that truly defines the narrative, the response. For Meghan Markle, that moment was not just about salvaging a public image. It was about navigating a storm she couldn't fully control, a storm amplified by decades of media scrutiny, social expectation, and the unrelenting gaze of millions worldwide. Immediately after Cate Blanchett's razor-sharp remark, Meghan had only seconds to process, to breathe, to recalibrate. Imagine being on a stage, under the watchful eyes of royalty, Hollywood icons, dignitaries, and journalists, when someone cuts through the room's decorum with a word designed to sting. It's a test of poise, resilience, and emotional intelligence, all in real time, without the safety of rehearsal. Meghan's first instinct, likely, was to maintain control. Her measured composure, the polite nod, the subtle continuation of her speech, was more than etiquette, it was survival. Her team, both immediate aides and long-standing advisors, moved swiftly behind the scenes. Communications staff began drafting potential clarifications, social media managers monitored live reactions, and media strategists predicted how the moment would be spun in different markets. In high-stakes events like this, every second counts. One wrong gesture, one slip of the tongue, or one poorly worded statement could escalate the controversy. And Meghan, as always, had to navigate these waters delicately, balancing authenticity with strategic damage control. But Meghan's response was more than calculated optics. It was a complex dance of emotion and performance. Public figures in her position must mask vulnerability while signaling control. Every smile, every pause, every carefully enunciated word is scrutinized for clues about internal state. Observers noted the subtle tightening around her eyes, the micro-adjustment of her posture, and the way her voice remained calm yet precise. These small details, almost imperceptible to the casual viewer, communicate volumes. To millions watching, she seemed composed. Yet anyone attuned to body language could detect the undercurrent of tension, the awareness of being publicly tested in an unprecedented way. Within hours, Meghan took to social media, though not directly with a statement on the incident. Instead, she focused on themes of gratitude, service, and unity. Messaging carefully crafted to redirect the narrative while addressing the event's emotional undertone. While she didn't explicitly reference Blanchett's remark, the subtext was unmistakable, acknowledgement without confrontation. This approach demonstrated an acute understanding of perception management. By reframing the moment around broader principles rather than personal rebuttal, she maintained dignity while subtly asserting resilience. Public reaction to this response was polarized. On one side, supporters praised Meghan for her grace under fire, noting that her silence on the insult, paired with the measured acknowledgement of honor, reflected maturity and composure. They argued that she had turned the narrative around, signaling strength in restraint rather than aggression. On the other side, critics questioned whether her response was calculated, artificial, or evasive. Was she genuinely handling the moment with dignity, or was this another carefully staged PR move designed to manage optics? The debate, as always, amplified interest and ensured the event would dominate news cycles for weeks. Meanwhile, news outlets dissected her every move. Analysts replayed clips of the ceremony frame by frame, pausing to examine the micro-expressions on Meghan's face, the tension in her voice, and the subtle gestures that communicated her internal state. Pundits debated the implications. Was Blanchett's remark a catalyst for a permanent shift in Meghan's public perception? Would Meghan's response enhance her image as a poised, resilient figure, or would it deepen the narrative of vulnerability and scrutiny that has long followed her? The analysis was exhaustive, leaving no detail untouched, and the social media storm was relentless. Memes, reaction videos, and opinion threads proliferated within minutes. Twitter users debated the fairness of Blanchett's comment. Instagram posts circulated freeze-frame reactions, and TikTok creators recreated the moment with dramatic interpretations. The velocity of these reactions was staggering. A single word had transformed into a global cultural touchstone, sparking conversation about humility, celebrity, authenticity, and public accountability. The incident had transcended the ceremony itself, becoming a defining moment in Meghan Markle's ongoing narrative. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team worked tirelessly to manage the narrative. They engaged with select journalists, released carefully worded statements emphasizing gratitude and humility, and coordinated appearances designed to reinforce composure and poise. Each move was calculated to shape perception while maintaining authenticity, a delicate balance that requires expertise, intuition, and a deep understanding of public psychology. Every detail, from wardrobe to body language to speech cadence, was scrutinized to ensure that Meghan projected confidence without arrogance, dignity without defensiveness. Yet the emotional dimension cannot be overlooked. Living under such scrutiny exacts a psychological toll. Meghan had to navigate not only public perception but also her internal response to a high-profile criticism delivered by someone she likely respected and admired. The tension between personal pride and public expectation creates a unique pressure, one that few outside her sphere can fully comprehend. Each interaction becomes a test of self-control, each public moment a negotiation between authenticity and survival. It's worth noting that Meghan's handling of this moment drew comparisons to other public figures who have faced sharp criticism. Unlike some who might lash out, retreat, or attempt to deflect, Meghan's response was subtle, strategic, and psychologically sophisticated. She maintained outward calm while signaling resilience, a feat that few in the public eye can achieve with such precision. This approach, while perhaps not satisfying critics who crave confrontation, demonstrated an awareness of the power of restraint in shaping long-term perception. But here's the twist. While Meghan's immediate response appeared composed, the private fallout was far more complex. Close sources indicated that the event sparked intense reflection. Questions about public image, vulnerability, and authenticity were revisited. Strategies for navigating media scrutiny, celebrity criticism, and public expectation were reassessed. The incident forced Meghan to confront the delicate balance between humility and self-promotion, between authenticity and perception, in a way that would influence her future public actions. And then there was the ripple effect beyond the public eye. Friends, advisors, and family members watched, analyzed, and discussed potential consequences. Conversations about narrative framing, strategic appearances, and media messaging dominated private discussions. Every action, from interviews to charity work to ceremonial appearances, was considered through the lens of how it might reinforce or counteract the narrative shaped by Blanchett's words. The moment was not just a public spectacle. It became a defining inflection point in Meghan's ongoing journey of public perception. Yet, despite all the calculations, strategies, and messaging, the world waited to see the human response. Beyond the carefully curated images and statements, how would Meghan process this personally? How would she reconcile the tension between public perception and private reality? In moments like these, even the most composed figures are tested. Every thought, every emotion, every instinct is scrutinized, internally and externally. And while the cameras and microphones capture the outward performance, the internal reckoning remains largely invisible, yet no less profound. And just when it seemed the situation had stabilized, the next chapter in this saga was already unfolding. Social media, media outlets, and the public had only begun to react. The narrative was still being written. Meghan's measured response had bought time, but it hadn't resolved the underlying tension. The real consequences, both personal and public, were just beginning to emerge. And what came next would push the story into uncharted territory, reshaping public perception and escalating the stakes far beyond anything anyone anticipated. Have you ever wondered what happens when the world collectively stops to watch one moment? When a single word, a single, sharply delivered comment, detonates across continents, infiltrating every news feed, every television screen, every conversation. That's exactly what happened after Cate Blanchett called Meghan Markle brainless. And the magnitude of the reaction was staggering. A global media frenzy that turned a ceremonial moment into an international headline. From the moment the ceremony concluded, reporters scrambled to frame the story. Leading outlets across London, New York, Sydney, and beyond published articles within hours. The headlines ranged from measured to sensational. Blanchett roasts Duchess at London ceremony. Meghan Markle publicly challenged by Hollywood icon. Royal etiquette meets brutal honesty. Television networks cut into programming to replay the exchange, often pausing frame by frame to analyze Meghan's expressions. Analysts debated whether the comment was justified, whether it reflected underlying truths, or whether it was simply an opportunistic remark designed to make headlines. Social media, of course, amplified the frenzy. Twitter exploded with hashtags like #BlanchettMoment, #MeghanRoast, and #FreedomOfTheCityDrama. TikTok creators reenacted the scene, each interpretation more dramatic than the last. Instagram influencers posted side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's micro-expressions, dissecting every blink, every smile, every subtle shift in posture. The velocity of dissemination was unprecedented. A word spoken in a single room had ricocheted across the globe in minutes, triggering debate in multiple languages, multiple time zones, and multiple cultural contexts. But what makes this frenzy so fascinating isn't just the sheer volume of coverage. It's the intensity of analysis and the conflicting narratives that emerged. On one hand, some commentators framed Blanchett as a fearless voice of truth. They admired her audacity, precision, and timing, calling her words a necessary wake-up call to a public figure who had long been both celebrated and criticized. On the other hand, critics accused Blanchett of cruelty, of publicly humiliating a woman in a moment that was supposed to honor her. The divergence in interpretation fueled endless debate, ensuring that the story would remain at the forefront of public consciousness for days, weeks, and even months. News segments weren't content to simply replay the incident. They invited experts to weigh in. Psychologists analyzed Meghan's body language, noting subtle tension around the eyes and jaw, interpreting it as a mixture of composure, shock, and internal processing. Media analysts explored the impact of viral attention, emphasizing that social media amplification often magnifies the perception of failure far beyond reality. Royal commentators speculated on the political and familial ramifications, questioning whether this public moment would affect Meghan's standing within royal circles or alter her global reputation. Every analysis layered additional complexity onto an already explosive event. Meanwhile, the frenzy wasn't limited to news outlets. Talk shows, podcasts, and online forums devoted entire episodes to dissecting the moment. Influencers created reaction videos, often framing the exchange as a dramatic showdown between two powerful women. Opinion columns debated whether Meghan's response had been strong enough, too subdued, or masterful in its subtlety. Online polls asked audiences to weigh in. Who won the moment? Blanchett's fearless honesty or Meghan's composed resilience? These discussions engaged millions, reinforcing the global fascination and keeping the story alive across platforms. And yet, the frenzy had layers beyond mere spectacle. It illuminated broader societal conversations about celebrity, accountability, humility, and the intersection of public expectation with private identity. Meghan's claim of not deserving the freedom of the city honor collided with a world that both idolized and scrutinized her. Blanchett's words crystallized the tension between public humility and global visibility, creating a symbolic moment that resonated far beyond the event itself. In other words, this wasn't just a roast. It was a cultural touchstone that forced the world to confront uncomfortable questions about fame, entitlement, and public perception. The global reaction also revealed deep cultural divides. In the United States, some praised Meghan for her composure, framing the moment as an illustration of dignity under pressure. In the United Kingdom, reactions were more polarized, reflecting centuries of royal tradition, media scrutiny, and social expectation. In other regions, commentary focused on the celebrity dimension, interpreting the exchange as a Hollywood-style confrontation transplanted into a historical, ceremonial setting. Across cultures, the moment was simultaneously interpreted as humiliating, instructive, and emblematic, a rare event where a single word could carry such multi-layered meaning worldwide. Even within the entertainment industry, reactions were intense. Actors, directors, and public figures weighed in, some in private messages leaked to journalists, others in carefully worded public statements. Blanchett's reputation as a fearless and candid performer was amplified, while Meghan's global profile became the subject of renewed scrutiny. In Hollywood circles, conversations revolved around the audacity of the remark and its delivery, with peers expressing awe at Blanchett's precision. Meanwhile, publicists and communications teams dissected the implications for Meghan's brand, her influence, and her media strategy moving forward. Social media, however, did something even more profound. It blurred the line between public perception and personal reality. Memes circulated framing Meghan as frozen or shocked, while others depicted Blanchett as the embodiment of truth-telling. Discussions weren't limited to observers. They actively engaged participants, with millions sharing opinions, judgments, and interpretations. Every post, every retweet, every comment added momentum to the narrative, creating a feedback loop in which public attention magnified perception, and perception in turn fueled further attention. In this sense, the frenzy became almost self-sustaining, growing beyond any individual's control. Yet, Despite the intensity of coverage and analysis, Meghan's measured responses, both during the ceremony and in subsequent communications, tempered some of the fallout. By emphasizing humility, service, and gratitude, she subtly reframed the narrative. Observers who were willing to look past the initial shock noted that Meghan had not overreacted, had not lashed out, and had maintained dignity in the face of a high-profile public challenge. This careful navigation highlighted the sophistication of her media strategy and reinforced a public perception of resilience and composure, even amid relentless scrutiny. But here's the crucial point. The media frenzy didn't just stop with immediate reaction. It set in motion a prolonged conversation, one that would dominate headlines for weeks and influence how Meghan's actions, appearances, and statements were interpreted moving forward. Every event she attended, every speech she gave, every social media post was now filtered through the lens of Blanchett's remark. Public attention intensified, anticipation built, and the stakes grew ever higher. The moment had become a fulcrum on which Meghan's public narrative pivoted, and the world was watching closely, waiting for what would come next. And just when it seemed the frenzy might begin to settle, something unexpected happened. Leaks from insiders, behind-the-scenes reports, and whispered commentary began to surface, offering tantalizing hints of private conversations, internal reactions, and strategic discussions. The story was no longer confined to what had been observed publicly. It now included speculation, intrigue, and a growing sense that the next chapter would escalate the drama even further. Because in a situation like this, a single word may ignite a fire, but the reactions, the strategy, and the human emotions that follow fuel the blaze. And as millions across the globe analyzed, debated, and shared their interpretations, it became increasingly clear. The real story wasn't just Blanchett's comment or Meghan's composure. It was what would come next. How Meghan, her team, and the wider world would respond in the days and weeks ahead would define the trajectory of this explosive narrative. The media frenzy was only the beginning.